Thank you very much. How's our mics back there? Okay. I will call this Tuesday, this is not September the 3rd, it's September the 17th, meeting of the Salina City Planning Commission to order. First item on the agenda is the approval of the summary minutes from September 3rd. Are there questions or comments or a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve.
Second. Any further conversation? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The item carries. Administrative items today, we have several. Item 2A, reconsideration of application M136. The staff have a report for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on a procedural note, I will refer you to the process by which this came back to you. You had a hearing on this item on July 16, 2013. You made a recommendation. That recommendation went forward to the City Commission. When the City Commission gets a recommendation from the Planning Commission, they can, what we do as a staff is we take your recommendation and put it into an ordinance form for the City Commission's consideration. Then they may adopt that ordinance as drafted, or they may adopt it with modifications, or if they disagree with your recommendation, they may override your recommendation, but at their first review of that, they can only override your recommendation if they have 4 out of the 5 city commissioners that are in favor of overriding it. If there are not 4 votes that are in favor of overriding your recommendation, then they have the option of returning that to you for further consideration, together with they're obligated to provide a statement specifying the basis of their failure to agree with your recommendation or to approve the application. So our first item of business here is to look at the comprehensive plan, to look at what it says about this area south of State Street and west of Broadway Boulevard. And what we have added to your report here is that our first go-around, we did not probably go into as great a detail as what the comprehensive plan document goes into in terms of the Broadway corridor and its importance as a potential redevelopment corridor. And again, this goes back to discussions we've had before about if you have a community like most communities are, that you add commercial zoning in new locations and you have patterns of empty commercial space in previous commercial locations. One option is to redevelop those former commercial corridors with other uses. So the comprehensive plan goes into great detail about that in terms of the Broadway corridor. In terms of going back as to how we got here, we had a piece of property on South Cherry Street. It was owned by an out-of-state owner. They visited with staff about options for marketing that property. We met with them and also discussed with the realtor they were working with the fact that although this property is zoned RS, the city would not be in a position to issue a permit for a home or any other type of structure on South Cherry Street, primarily because we do not have any city utilities west of the creek there where we could provide water service, sewer service, or any type of fire protection for an occupied structure. So we did not hear anything more about that until we had some contact with Mr. Dethridge, and we determined that the property he had purchased was right here, that it was zoned RS, residential, commercial, and residential suburban. John, you need to go back to the comprehensive plan map. And in your packets, I have this area circled. I guess the one we have in the packet doesn't have the area circled. You're going to just have to keep zooming, John. And so, maybe slide up just a little. So, this is the area. This is the map that's subject to interpretation. This is the north side of State Street. This is the south side. This is Broadway. This represents the West Dry Creek Channel. And when the comprehensive plan was adopted, we pointed out to the Planning Commission and the City Commission at the time that showing this as urban residential conflicted with both the existing zoning and the existing uses of that property. And there were about 10 of those areas that we identified in the community. And the plan was adopted after we called out those conflicts, and there was some follow-up discussion about downzoning, particularly the corridor here from commercial to some residential designation, which would basically make the existing commercial uses pre-existing non-conforming. There was not interest on the Planning Commission or the City Commission at that time about initiating a downzoning. So Mr. Dethridge has purchased this property. He wishes to put it to a use that is, we would classify as a contractor's storage yard. And it is a use that's permitted in the I-2 district. We directed him towards looking at I-2 because of the existing I-2 that's there present on South Cherry. We would also agree that this was done in 1978, and in our, as planners, that is not something that we would support doing today, and we think that the Planning Commission and the City Commission back at that time made an error by simply singling out this single lot and saying that's I-2 and we're not going to worry about the rest, because what we indicated to Mr. Dethridge and Mr. Story was that to make any kind of sensible decision here, we need to start at State Street and work our way down. And so the basis for the I-2 application was the fact that we had an existing I-2 zoning there and all this I-2 zoned area up here. So we had pointed out to you in the report that the comprehensive plan is, it indicates that not all zoning applications are reasonable just because they fall within the land use category you see on the map, and contrarily they're not all unreasonable because they don't conform, that there's other things to look at, including where circumstances or land uses or development goals have changed or visions have changed. But the fact of the matter is, on the comprehensive plan, the area west of Broadway and south of State Street is shown as future urban residential. And that would imply residential housing that would be 5 to 8 units per acre, or perhaps a higher density once utilities were established. The applicant, and I-2 is not something that would be a zoning category that would fall within the urban residential category. The applicant is requesting that the future land use designation be changed to employment to support a request for I-2 zoning. So basically, he's requesting that the purple employment area be extended down that east side of Cherry. And I-2 would fall within that range of zoning districts that would be allowed in an employment area. A couple things I wanted to point out that we have highlighted in the staff report about the Broadway corridor. On the one hand, the plan says the Broadway corridor is an ideal place to start redevelopment within the community. It also acknowledges that redevelopment of the Broadway corridor is a tougher proposition than new development, as is most redevelopment. Probably the most important statement in there that we didn't emphasize clearly enough the first time was highlighted in bold on page 5, which says that the existing commercial and industrial development along Broadway, south of State Street, should be redeveloped with higher intensity urban residential uses. And given this map, which has this area that kind of goes with the Broadway corridor, and Cherry falls in here, and this is the new cutoff channel and levee, and this is the 55-acre Gardner property there. One way to interpret that is to say that everything south of State Street, west of Broadway, should be redeveloped with urban residential uses. And so we have looked at the request. The request that was filed on behalf of the property owners was to amend the designation from urban residential to employment in order to support a companion zoning change. So some of the things you are to look at is whether the plan amendment is justified by changing conditions in the community, whether the amendment advances goals and policies contained in the plan, whether there is public need for changing the plan, whether the public need is best served by changing the designation, whether a change that's being requested would negatively impact the surrounding area. So the urban residential is designed to encourage for slightly higher density residential development than our suburban residential. It would be a mix of housing types, could include things like churches and schools, parks, things like that. It does not include light industrial uses like landscaping contractors. On the north side of State Street, we're looking at an employment area, and on the south side, an urban residential area. And the primary reason that State Street, the south side of State Street, is zoned RS is because when the property was annexed in 1971 and then reclassified again in 1977, all of the property over here on the west side of Cherry Street is unplatted, and if you have unplatted property in the city limits, it either has to be zoned agricultural or RS. So the RS kind of serves as a holding zone until some proposed use comes along. So it's not as if somebody would likely develop the property and keep the zoning RS. They would probably seek a higher zoning. When I first started in this position, the first project I looked at was a application that the state did not approve, but there was a plan to build a Greyhound racing park on this piece of property right here. Right at the time when Greyhound racing became legalized, and someone thought that Salina needed a racetrack in that location. The state did not approve the license, and the track never got built, and nothing has been proposed on that property since that time. But the applicant was justifying their request that this area, and if you've driven it, you know it's somewhat rural, somewhat isolated, somewhat industrial in character, and it does not have public water and sewer. And because it doesn't have utilities, you can't really put it to any use except for open air type uses. And so I will focus in the same place we focused last time and the City Commission when they looked at it. The role of the Planning Commission, City Commission, is to first determine whether you see Cherry Street south of State Street as part of the Broadway redevelopment corridor? If so, then you need to consider whether land use decisions in this area should be based on perpetuating the existing development patterns and conditions, or decisions should be based on the future vision for this area set out in the plan. And so when you looked at this, you really determined in your minds, at least as we interpreted, that it wasn't in your minds part of the Broadway redevelopment corridor, that the area west of Dry Creek was different than east of Dry Creek, and you found it to be semi-rural and semi-industrial in character, and you found it to be more similar to the area north of State Street than what is along Broadway. That is true in terms of the existing conditions. The City Commission chose to focus more on the future vision as urban residential, and they felt that going in the employment area direction and moving that south of State Street was moving away from the goals or vision in the plan of this as a future urban residential. And you can see, and I don't know if you can slide this up, John, but this is a what we would call, I call the Sharp Track, that's now owned by Michael Gardner. Extends from State Street all the way down to here, where this is South Street here, and this line, this is the Peony Patch area here, and that ties back down to Beverly. But basically you have that, but everything from there up to the creek up is part of a 55-acre tract, and the concern of the City Commission was that moving towards employment area down Cherry Street or moving it south of State Street could potentially impact the future of that area in a negative way. So when they looked at this, their findings were, based on their reading of the plan, was that it is and should be considered a part of the Broadway Boulevard redevelopment corridor, that if you made it an employment area, that would actually move away from the goals and policies contained in the plan regarding the redevelopment of the corridor. They didn't see that there was any unmet public needs that would be met by amending the plan, and their concern was that the going in that direction could negatively impact future redevelopment of the surrounding area. I think their primary focus was that if you did something here, it may or may not impact here, but it could certainly impact what happened here if the employment area or the industrial area got a toehold. So your options as it relates to the comprehensive plan and the future land use map is I've outlined for you the findings that you made. Those are on page 8. I've outlined for you on page 8 and 9 the findings that the City Commission made, and you have the opportunity, after hearing from anything the applicant might want to add, that you may resubmit your same recommendation, and you can enhance or modify your findings if you so choose, or you may simply resubmit your you can change your recommendation if you want to modify your findings. So with that, I would be open to any questions you have. I did not attach the City Commission's minutes. I think they probably had an over hour-long discussion and questions on this item and spent quite a bit of time on the Broadway corridor and what the comprehensive plan has to say about it. But if I were to focus on their motion for sending it back, their concern was that to make sure that the potential impacts of amending the land use designation, that there be consideration given. If you could go back to the aerial photo, John. That this is a fairly large area that may have some long-term future development impact, and they thought that decisions made here impacted the developability or redevelopability of that property there, assuming that over time the adequate utilities and infrastructure are provided at that point in time. But again, this area right here, when the comprehensive plan showed it as future urban residential, we pointed out to the Planning Commission and City Commission that conflicted with what was actually going on there in terms of zoning and uses, and that plan was adopted with the urban residential designation with that knowledge. So that is where we are. The City Commission disagreed with your recommendation as to changing the land use designation, and they did not have 4 votes to override your recommendation, so they have sent it back for your reconsideration. And again, your options are to resubmit your same recommendation with or without the same findings, and you are certainly free, after quizzing staff or discussing amongst yourselves, you could modify your original recommendation, and then that would go back to the City Commission at their second opportunity. They may either agree with you, or if they disagree with you, they can overturn your recommendation with 3 votes on the second go-around, as opposed to the supermajority the first time they see it.
Dean, don't we have the option to, it seems like there's one more option we have, and correct me if I'm wrong, we have one more option. We can just simply not take any further action.
Well, if you didn't take any further
Then it's
action,
still in
then
the
I would
hands of the
have to
commission.
interpret what that meant, and so it would be far easier if your actions to say, we made our recommendation on July 16th and we haven't changed our minds.
Well, I have some comments I want to make as soon as it's appropriate, the chair.
Oh, well, let's take questions of staff. Well, I think anybody
Yeah,
have things they want to ask?
I didn't even talk about this when we talked about July 16th, I don't think, but on the Broadway corridor now, all the properties near this are either zone C5 or C6, all the properties that kind of back up to this.
John, do you want to go to the,
Right. Everything clear down to Kmart, maybe
right.
even Kmart,
And
I don't know.
you need to keep going, if you can scroll up at all, John.
But my point is, driving around today and looking at this again, there's a lot of existing outdoor storage in those C5 properties right now. There's old motor vehicles, there's current motor vehicles, there's boats, there's all kinds of things. There's
Right.
construction equipment. So the applicant is really after just an outdoor place to store construction equipment and supplies. So is C5 a zoning option that this could be directed to?
Yes, and obviously we've got 2 different items here. The first item is to address the larger question in the future, land use designation. However, you are correct on 2 points. One, a outdoor contractor storage yard is a permitted use in C5.
Okay.
You may always grant a lesser change than what is requested, and the most restrictive thing you could do is to make a recommendation that it be a Plan C5 with only one single use allowed. That is the most restrictive thing, but as I back up the as I back that up, that we still have to have, that is item 2B, that is not item 2A.
Yeah, let's
Okay,
stick with
but-
the matter at hand.
Well, the matter at hand is really muddied if you read the plan and you look at the overall, I'm talking the comprehensive plan, the overall idea of total redevelopment of the Broadway corridor. And one of the big key things that needs to happen, that to my knowledge has not happened, is at some point we need to have a zoning category that allows mixed use. So just thinking about that myself, I'm thinking we need a mixed-use plan development zone, which we don't have right now, that essentially says any use in C5 through R and any use in residential, say through R2.5 or maybe even R3, is a permitted use in the multi-use zone. And if we did that, then you look at every C5 in town and every residential in town, and you look at those as a possible redevelopment as a mixed-use plan development. So that's kind of where I got my thinking that if we put this in C5 and then we develop a zone that would be relatively easy transition from C5 to mixed-use, new urbanist type of development, we'd be working toward this overall plan of redeveloping Broadway. The other thing that really bothered me about going down Broadway, or is I think a valid observation, is that there's already a number of businesses, especially right along Walnut on this west side of Broadway, that are vacant. The business has closed basically, I think, from old age of the owners. Kind of a lack of interest on development. But at some point, there has to be some younger, more innovative people coming to town and say, we're ready to redevelop something, to do something new, and there are these vacant properties on Broadway, let's do our business there. So I can see that part of what the City Commission was telling us, that if we don't start making accommodations for future redevelopment of Broadway, we may never start, and we need to start. So that's why I asked the question of going to a lesser zone like C5, which is what this property would be contiguous with, and which would have the more flexibility in the future.
This channel area, it is essentially correct. You have this intervening channel area that's owned by the city, but you are correct. This parcel right here is owned, the I-2 parcel is owned by Peary Automotive.
Also owns property.
Also owns the property on the other side of the channel right here where they actually operate their business, which is zoned C5.
Correct.
The question was posed to me, and it could be done very artfully, is could this property potentially be rezoned by saying the comprehensive plan doesn't need to be amended at all. You would leave it as urban residential, but you would rezone it to the most restrictive thing you could, consistent with what's on the other side of the creek on the Broadway side, with the appropriate language that says if you did have a mixed-use redevelopment district, maybe the C5 type uses could be done in combination with that. So it is possible to say, all right, we've looked at this and we agree that maybe amending the plan to show this as employment is not justified, and concur with some of the findings made by the City Commission. And then if that's the direction you want to go, I can explain what options are available on the zoning side. But I did want to explain the concept of down zoning and what it does. And I'm not sure that Mr. Wooster understands this, but the Worcester VW repair that was there for years. That is zoned. What happened was this area was put in the city in 1887. Then in 1934, when Broadway Boulevard was constructed, because this is unrecognizable. This is the way the property was platted. We're right over here. There is no Broadway. And as a matter of fact, at one time, Dry Creek Channel was located east of where Broadway is today. So the creek got straightened. Broadway was put in. Everything over here was altered. This remained completely unchanged. Then in 1934, everything on the other side of the channel was de-annexed. While it was outside the city limits, the salvage yard and Mr. Wooster's business were established in Salina County. Then they were annexed into the city, and so Mr. Wooster's business is grandfathered in. However, at any period of time, it is vacant for over a 12-month period because it's zoned residential. It cannot be used again for commercial purposes. So if you had a downzoning of the west side or the west and east sides of Broadway to some other use like a residential classification, then what that would mean is as businesses went vacant and they were vacant for a period of more than 12 months, then the only thing that could go back would be something that was of residential or mixed use character. So that is the way that the downzoning and the grandfathering works. But I'm not sure that we did a great job of explaining the first go around that the current status of Mr. Wooster's business is that it was a grandfathered in property, and as soon as it's vacant for 12 continuous months, it cannot be used for any other business purpose. It can only be used for what the RS district allows, and that is the way it's present today. The same thing goes for the Ronick salvage yard to the south. It is a pre-existing grandfathered in salvage yard. If it was ever abandoned for a period of 12 months, it would lose its grandfathered status. So 2A is still the most important thing is for you to decide whether you view this as part of the Cherry Street as part of the Broadway redevelopment corridor, and then, and I'm just reading between the lines, but basically, when you focused on this, you focused on what the existing conditions are, and when the City Commission looked at it, they focused on how that designation fit in with the long-term future vision. And so they thought that being consistent with the long-term future vision, it should remain shown as urban residential.
The Gardner track, has the owner given us any input?
No, they have gotten notice of the hearings. They got the packet for today's meeting. I have not spoken with the Gardners. I don't know if they have any plans other than to farm the property, but again, it's a 55-acre parcel. It could be developed in some fashion when the infrastructure is provided, and right now the vision in the plan is that is an urban residential area, and the concern was in inserting a finger of employment area down here could potentially impact that.
And you still got a creek there, and that's part of the floodplain.
It's a very low volume creek, and it has a very narrow, small floodplain because the real Dry Creek channel is right here, and this is kind of a cutoff channel. It only gets a limited amount of storm drainage, but the the water coming from the south that's trying to get up to Mulberry Creek is actually coming through this channel. So what you see out there at Crawford and I-135 and is coming out from the airport industrial area, it's coming up this channel and going to Mulberry Creek. This has just got some storm drainage that's feeding into it in this limited area, and it's moving its way. That is the original channel. This is the bypass channel.
Other questions of staff?
Ma'am, I do want to say something whenever it's appropriate.
Well,
And it's germane to the topic, and it ends up and I think it's relevant.
go right ahead, Mr. Perney. He got his editorial in, so you go right ahead.
That was an editorial? I didn't recognize that.
Appropriate, cut me off.
No, go right ahead.
But I
Get
did,
it in the record.
I did take time because I did watch the commission meeting on Access TV, the full hour on this topic and the full hour on the next topic that's going to be coming before us. And it was helpful to see that because I think I gained some insight in the disconnect that might exist. And I want to be complimentary of the commission here because I was a bit critical of them the last time in the way they maybe handled some of our recommendations that they didn't endorse. But they were not critical of the Planning Commission in any way. But it was obvious from watching that meeting that they see this particular action completely different than we do. And let me tell you why I think that exists, and I think it ties to exactly what Dean said. In watching the commission meeting, they really do see the comprehensive plan as a guiding document for many of their decisions. And they think it was developed by the community, and it should be supported until such a point we look at the whole plan and say, maybe that's not right in this area. But we haven't done that yet. And I think their fear was we're taking a peninsula or an isolated parcel and zoning it different, and then you may head down that slope of once you do that and you turn that into industrial, and maybe another into industrial, and then another into industrial, pretty soon you're industrial by default. In other words, because once you turn a few parcels in that area into industrial, you basically have eliminated the potential of development for residential in that area. The other thing I noticed on the commission meeting is that I think our planning commission has really been pro-development, and I feel like we've been pro-owner in many of our decisions. And I'm not saying the city commission is not, but the things they have to weigh is, and I think they weigh it kind of carefully, is the impact on the whole of the community and how they see that. And I thought they deliberated that very well. And the other thing I think they see, and I'm sure that's not so germane to this issue, but certainly relevant to the ones that are coming up, is they look at something that we don't have to, and that is the cost factor and the cost-benefit factor. And they did a great deal of time talking about the cost of extending utilities and the potential in the future of extending utilities appropriate for this area as well as the next one on our topic. And I don't think oftentimes we think about the cost to the community or to the taxpayers when we approve something, because utilities and roads are a big part of that. And then they have to go through all that struggle about a benefit district and who's responsible for the extension of utilities and so forth. So sometimes, it was mentioned, I don't think we always have all of the information that the city commission has, and so when we make decisions, it's a little harder for us maybe than it is for them. They've had time to look at our recommendation, they've had time to talk to their staff and see how this all plays into the big picture of the city. So in the end, I think the real issue here is, and possibly they're not wrong, is maybe we need to look at that whole area as to what the future is. The Broadway corridor development, the industrial that is there, which is there by default, and then do we want to convert other parcels into higher zoning, such as industrial or even commercial? And I think that was their interest, and I understand that interest. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions of staff?
If we have an option to just weigh in with some of our impressions, it seems after Mr. Kennedy's remarks, I'd like to add on to those. I did not think about this either at the time we looked at this before, but when I look at that whole area, one of the things that we've talked about in other meetings is that the interstate is really prime real estate in a way that other real estate is not. That is, it's open to uses that are going to speak for this community, for people driving by and hopefully coming in. And State Street is another corridor and a key corridor from the interstate to come in. We do need to think carefully about what is there. what could potentially be there. I was at a North Salina development meeting, and I think actually Mr. Story was there also. We were looking at what might happen, and there's been a lot of talk about what might happen at the junction of I-35 and I-70. One of the real difficulties is that is right smack in the floodplain, and how are you going to handle all the water that can come there? This is a perfect time to talk about flooding and potential for flooding. Hope we don't get what Colorado got. But State Street's corridor is, I believe, within the dike. It is not, in that respect, then in the floodplain. So it could be used as a really primary site for some kind of development and might affect, and granted we're talking about farther into the future, a place where, whether it's residential, urban residential, whether there would be a retail center. I'm not advocating that, yet another retail center right at the interstate, at the junction of State and I-35. But in line with Mr. Kennedy's observations, it seems to me that some caution is merited in what kind of appearance we have for the community coming in. It is not as much of a gateway as 9th Street is, nor Magnolia, nor Crawford, but it is potentially a really beneficial area. And so, in line with his comments, I think that some caution might be exercised by the city, and I don't, at the moment, have a possible proposition for that. Some people have talked about a casino. I'm not necessarily in favor of that, but something that would become a center. So one more thing while I'm just speculating, and so you can call this wool gathering, but one of the things that has been talked about among some of the progressive folks is what happens in an economy which is really struggling. And of course we're in a struggling economy right now, I'm told, right and left. But if we had an agricultural area that could be used for growing crops, for a center, for people of whatever means, but this is certainly close to a residential area with some means, what if some kind of community garden and processing food plant were there, because this is, after all, agricultural land right now. That's just one vision. But my main point is some caution might be exercised by the city, by us, by the city commission.
I would add one thing to that. I see it as totally different. I did see the same meeting, but I think it's interesting that the city commission would look at that and have the word residential anywhere in it, given the fact we have prime residential area that's trying to be developed for residential housing in South Salina and East Salina, yet they aren't even annexing that, yet we want to hold this for residential future. Yet we have residential that's available to us east and south, and they're not even annexing that. So I find that to be interesting. I believe both of you have a valid point of looking at that, but I would say that if I'm looking at preserving residential for the city of Salina, this is not a piece that I see as residential with I-70, or excuse me, I-35, the drainage ditch. It's a low-line area, whether you want to call it flood area or not. I've seen low-line water in that area. And then for what's on the other side, I believe that this planning commission has always been, it thinks for the future as well, but there's also something to be said who's somebody who's in our community now who's standing there saying, I'm ready to do something with this property that will benefit Salina, add taxes, and move forward. And so I find that interesting as that comprehensive plan puts residential in that particular area.
And Commissioner Walsh, I understand that, and it is a very logical and correct assessment based on current conditions. I'm recalling one comment made in that meeting, and I think it was in the minutes, by Commissioner Hardy, that at the same time that area we're talking about, the east and south, is perhaps closer to the center of downtown Assyria than to downtown Salina.
So what?
I have a question about the flood control dike. When was that? When was the dike, the flood control dike, put in there?
Flood control was put
60?
in right around 1960, and what you're seeing on this map displayed there, the purple striped area. So except for these businesses here on State Street and the concrete batch plant, all of this area on the north side of Old Highway 40 is floodplain. This is all floodplain. This is the levee. This is not floodplain. There's a narrow band of floodplain along the Dry Creek channel, but this area, what distinguishes this area from this area is that this is levee protected, and it does mean it is not in the floodplain, and it is developable or more developable from that standpoint than these areas out here, which are more subject to
And I stand
flooding.
corrected. I am talking about on the other side of the dike, not inside the dike. So,
But, Mike, the reason for asking that is I want to preserve as much residential area as anything. It'd be a nice place for another park. Nevertheless, I've been in Salina since '70, and for whatever reason, businesses and developers have shunned that area now for the biggest part of 40 years, 45 years. I'm trying to look and figure out what's going to occur in the next 35 or 40 years that's going to make that property any more desirable for residential use. And that's where I have a hard time with it. We have somebody who wants to put something there other than sunflowers. Now, I'm not going to debate whether or not the weeds that are there are going to be more attractive than the outdoor storage areas, but it is going to be utilized. But as near as I can tell, this property has sat there for 50 years or 45, and people have shunned it. I don't know why, and I wished if I could get my mind around that, it would be easier for me to understand why we're holding it as a residential area.
Well, I will say partially that is the fault or responsibility of staff, is that it is not absolutely written in stone that any time any zoning decision is made that is contrary to the future land use map, that it is not legal or defensible. But what we did is that we started this out by saying what you are requesting in the way of zoning is contrary to what the future land use plan says here, and the process that has been set up in the Kansas statutes is actually designed to encourage interchange or interaction between the planning commissions and city commissions by giving great weight to the public hearings that you hold and the recommendations that you make, so that your recommendations cannot just be turned over lightly. And that is why the statutes say that if there's a disagreement, that they can return it to you and communicate to you what their thinking is. And that is what they have done. And you have the information, you are familiar with the area, you have been informed about the plan, and so there is an option to say, well, maybe there's a way for him to utilize the property without a need for changing the plan. And you could say you concur with leaving the long-term vision as it is, or you can take the view that you have looked at this area, you don't think that the urban residential designation is realistic or achievable, and that's essentially what you said the first time, that you see the area south of State Street and west of Dry Creek is more similar to this area than you do to this area. But you are not obliged to do that, but we brought it to you because no one should entertain zoning changes that don't conform with what the comprehensive plan says lightly. So that is the way that we ordered this, and really that the way that that it should occur is looking at the big picture. The comprehensive plan is the big picture and the vision. The zoning is the small picture focused more on the traits of the individual property. And so, again, these items mix together, but in the context of a rezoning case, one of the things that you are to look at is the suitability of the development of the property under the existing zoning. You're to look at whether the zoning and use that's requested is compatible or in character with the surrounding property. You're to look at the availability of utilities. You're also to look at what the comprehensive plan says about it, what the Kansas Supreme Court and statutes don't say is what weight you have to give to those factors. If I were, I would be agreeing with Mr. Kennedy that in looking at those different factors in a zoning case, the current city commission is giving greater weight to what the comprehensive plan says than the other factors. And so that is, I believe, the reason that this has been sent back, and their primary request was that you, if you are in favor of a land use plan amendment, that you look at that in terms of how that could potentially impact the residential development potential of this tract here, as well as the redevelopment on the Broadway corridor.
Dean, I understand the comprehensive plan. I understand that years ago somebody decided that this was the right decision to make, that be a zoned residential area. It seems like it's a great location off a major interstate with great transportation potential. Are we at any time maybe taking an area that could be a good large plat of land to put industry in and scaring people off from using it as an industrial area by zoning it as an urban residential? And it seems like if it's zoned urban residential and a company comes to Salina and says, well, we've got to change the zoning and everything because the comprehensive plan says it's this.
It's not zoned for urban residential today. What I explained is that it's all zoned RS because the RS is kind of a holding zone till there is a plat for some form of development. But under RS, there are no business type uses allowed. So this business operates there, but it's a pre-existing grandfathered in business. When it was annexed, the Worcester VW repair was a pre-existing non-conforming business, but it does not allow new businesses. And again, this was all zoned RS. The City Commission and Planning Commission in 1978 rezoned a piece of property. And when we were working with Mr. Deathridge, one of the first things it took us about 2 or 3 meetings to figure out was whether he had bought this property or not. And so when we determined that he had not bought this property, he had bought this property, then the answer was that he cannot develop or use that property for a landscape contractor's storage yard under the current RS zoning, and that furthermore the comprehensive plan showed that as urban residential, which would not support expanding this IS or I-2 toehold right there. So you as a planning commission are perfectly free to say, we've looked at this area, we don't see the urban residential designation as being realistic. That is your prerogative to say. And so you can resubmit the same recommendation if in your interpretation the urban residential designation on the map is not realistic. However, if it is viewed as something that's achievable or viable long-term, then that is something that the City Commission is trying to hang on to. So again, as it relates to the comprehensive plan and the future land use designation, your options are to say that the urban residential should be maintained, which was what I believe the City Commission was communicating, or you can resubmit your same recommendation and say that based on your view of the area, it is not realistic to think that that would develop as an urban residential area.
On page 2 of the report where it says what's potential zoning districts are in an urban residential, new urban and mixed-use districts, and up above that it says secondary uses are convenience retail service. Since we don't have the new urban residential zone, we don't have a mixed-use district zone, does that mean that for the time being our existing commercial up to C5 would fall under the urban residential land use category?
I don't personally think so. I think it would stop somewhere at C2, C1 and C2. We had...
But is that written anywhere?
It is not written anywhere.
Okay, so...
What occurred at the intersection of Greeley and Ohio, that is shown at the northwest corner of Greeley and Ohio and into Hazel Court area. That is shown as future urban residential. There was some existing C1 and C2 there. And what we pointed out to the Planning Commission and the City Commission was that because of the very small scale of the lots and the C1 and C2 uses being very limited to the idea between convenience retail and service is that they are businesses that provide convenience retail and service to nearby residents in the neighborhood. So certainly a beauty salon or things of that nature would be a small scale retail and service. Where you run afoul of the C5 is that C5 allows things like contractors' storage yards and used car dealerships and things like that that don't really fit into that convenience retail and service. So if you were to create an urban residential or mixed-use district, I don't think it would include things like a lot of the C5 type uses that are allowed, many of which are a very large scale that don't really fit into convenience retail and service, and that is the concern there. But as I mentioned, your choices as to the zoning would be to go to be as restrictive as a planned C5 that limited the use of the property to a single C5 use. But you are correct that because the urban residential and mixed use don't exist, you can only make observations about what convenience retail and service mean.
So I'm not sure I understand, Dean, but would we have the option of zoning this to a C1, C2 future urban residential for the kind of mixed use that you talked about at Greeley in Ohio?
The first zoning district classification that allows a contractor's storage yard with outdoor storage is the C5 district.
Got it.
So if Mr. Deathridge bought a lot at the corner of Greeley and Ohio and wanted to do that, he would not be able to because the C1 and C2 zoning don't allow a contractor's storage yard. What is correct is that we have C5 zoning over here, and we have potentially you could go in and say that this touches this C5, and you could extend that there and base it on that decision, and that would still make it commercial use, but it would avoid some of the concerns about the unlimited I-2 and things of that nature. But again, that's the cart before the horse. Your first decision that you need to make is to take the information communicated back from the City Commission, decide whether you see Cherry Street south of State Street as part of the redevelopment corridor for Broadway, and whether you think the land use decision should be based on what's there existing today or what the future vision is for this area set out in the comprehensive plan, which is today urban residential.
Dean,
And you are certainly free to say, we don't think urban residential is realistic.
In listening, I listened to what Todd and Jerry said, and I understand when I shared earlier, I don't know exactly what the best use of this is. I'm not a planner, and I don't know if the future could be residential. I don't know if the future could be industrial. I don't know if it could be commercial. But I think the point I really do feel strongly about is I hate to see us start zoning it a small piece at a time. I would rather the whole plan be looked at, and maybe along State Street on the south side could possibly need to be commercial, and then behind that could be industrial. In other words, change that whole parcel. But my question is that possible? Is that possible in how do we, in the comprehensive plan, to look at the whole thing, have someone like yourself who's a planner, draw it out and say, this is what it could look like to turn it into more commercial industrial, and then look at that as a whole, and then each piece that comes in under that could fit nicely or not?
That's mine too, and part of that is, part of my, extending my question from before, is it possible, I know that's not the question in front of us now, but is it possible at our own initiative, or as Mr. Kennedy suggests, at the planner's suggestion, to make the Gardner area extending west of there into a C1, C2 future urban residential mixed use category? Is that something we have in our arsenal, and is that possible to do?
Well, it's already shown that way, so if somebody comes in with a plan for, let's say somebody says, I want to buy this piece right here and put in a mini warehouse complex. Mm-hmm. We're going to tell them, A, it's not zoned for that, and B, the comprehensive plan does not support rezoning this property for a mini warehouse complex.
But that's my question. Can that whole area not be changed so the comprehensive plan does allow that?
It could.
Yeah, that was my question.
And what they're, I think what we failed to do is, as a staff, we said you don't make decisions one parcel at a time like was done
That's
here.
what I said.
You need to look at a larger area. There's nothing wrong that says, you know what, John, if you can go back to the comprehensive plan map, it's not to say anybody is going, that they would agree with you, only agreeing from the standpoint that says when you're looking at these areas, you need to look at the larger area. So what you said was, well, we, based on the existing conditions and what's up here, we see this as more like this purple area here, so we think that the east side of Cherry Street, that could be extended. If you believed that and said, we think that basically this whole area should be looked at in that direction as opposed to the urban residential that's shown, you could say that. And that it probably, the statements made about this area here would extend to the whole area. But this whole discussion is, what is the community vision for the long-term development of that area? And reasonable people can disagree about what is likely to occur, but their first request was for you to look at the area as a whole, as opposed to just the smaller Cherry Street focus. But you are free to expand your recommendations in that regard, realizing that the application that you have in front of you just deals with that area on the east side of Cherry Street.
I must have been asleep the last time when we were looking at this, but I want to be absolutely certain I'm correct, that the piece of property directly north of the proposed I-2 would revert back to RS, right? If, in fact, that business were to close for a 12-month period of time?
It is closed.
It is closed. So what I don't, and we want to make, it's not an easy thing to monitor, and we want to make sure everybody understands that over on the west side of Broadway, because that property is zoned C5 today, if you have buildings over there that go vacant, and they can sit vacant for 3 years, and then somebody can go back in there and they can put in a business or use that fits within C5. The difference between that and Mr. Wooster's property at the corner of Cherry and State Street is that Mr. Wooster's property has been vacant for over 12 months. There is no business tenant or owner who could buy Mr. Wooster's property and reintroduce a business in there today. That's right. And so that is because it is zoned RS today, and that's one of the reasons that Mr. Wooster joined in the application, is that if he had a different zoning classification that actually allowed business uses, then those would be permitted. But as it stands today, when you are in a district that, and we had that come up, I don't think a lot of people realized it, but the area that is the insurance agency at Ohio and Ash, that in 1977, that property was rezoned to residential, which meant it could continue to be an insurance office, but if it was vacant for a period of 12 months, it could no longer be used for any business purpose. And there are a number of places like that around the community where there are existing businesses and they can function day to day, but that if they're abandoned for a period of 12 months, they cannot be used for a commercial purpose.
And Dean, I didn't need the entire explanation. It's just that the strip north of where we were looking and the strip south of where we were looking are currently RS and
right. They are. Everything is zoned RS. The only justification that Mr. Dethridge's application had to even really be considered seriously on the zoning side of things was the fact that this was an existing I-2 property and that this piece is contiguous to an existing I-2 zone, and the only non-residential zoning that we had in this area is down here, which is I-2, which is here, which is I-2, which is here was I-2. So when we looked at that, we said, you know, the only things in terms of compatibility is the I-2. The flip side of that is that it all stays RS, and then at some point either the Planning Commission or City Commission, either body could initiate a change to wipe that out, because what should have occurred when this application was filed was that the Planning Commission and City Commission should have looked at the larger area and not just focused on this one piece. And the mistake that was made was that this is basically a spot zoning of a single parcel, and that is partially being used to justify the zoning change that is item 2B.
I agree.
Other questions or opinions? I apologize to the applicant for us, but if you would like to address the commission.
What you have is your initial vision or findings, which is reflected at the top of page 8 there. You have the City Commission's vision or findings, which are reflected at the bottom of page 8 and page 9 there. And your recommendation was that this area, within this area here, be shown as employment area instead of as urban residential. You could modify that and make comments or commentary about the whole thing, but the only item that is in front of you is, you need to go back to the box for me, John, is this area here. That is the area that is the amendment that is before you. You can make suggestions or comments or your position on this whole other area, but the question is, should this continue to be shown as urban residential on the comprehensive plan, or should this be shown as employment area as you originally recommended?
I want to make just one more comment before we hear from the applicant. I'll make it short. In conversation with Commissioner Bosmeyer, I think I understand him correctly. He can weigh in if I'm understanding it incorrectly, that the I-2 designation and the present businesses existing north of State Street are a discouragement from the kind of urban residential potential development, even from a mixed commercial development, that's a disincentive to put those there. Am I correct?
If you had a what's referred
Doesn't seem like
to
a
there as
residential area
a mixed-use
at all.
Yeah.
district, you would not include in that mixed-use district the types of businesses that you see on the north side of State
Right.
Street. That is a
Right.
correct statement.
Right. And so my comment in response, and at this point I'm still just sort of weighing this, is that what we have here then, and I think this is the City Commission's finding too, what we have here is a weighing of potential future uses, perhaps even reconstructing some of the uses in the I-2 to be compatible with a comprehensive plan mixed-use area to the south of State Street. So I think that's what we're faced with, is a potential future use as compared to what is there now and how we direct or don't direct it.
Again, I can't speak or reinterpret for it, but if I had to interpret what I heard from the City Commission and at the City Commission meeting, that going towards employment area and going towards I-2 would perpetuate what's already there, but would not upgrade or move the area in a different direction. And their focus was more on moving the area in a different direction or upgrading it than it was in perpetuating the existing conditions. That's the fair way that I would characterize it.
May we hear from the applicant?
Ed Dethridge, D&E Rental. It's really hard to say. I've driven a lot of miles, going to a lot of different states, and I've gone down interstates. And the first thing I see when I come into these towns, I see industry, and in certain areas, you see residential. Right now, we've got a lot of industrial area and businesses, even going down Broadway. All you see is businesses in that area. You know, if everything like from Cherry Street over was industrial, then that would still leave the other side of Cherry Street able for the residential filling that the city, you know, was looking for. But how soon, you know, that's been vacant or a wheat field for a long time. And I know the past owner, if that was such a good residential development, he would have done that a long time ago, because he is a very smart businessman. He's no longer, he passed away quite some time ago, but he was a very smart businessman, Dwayne Sharp. I don't know if any of you knew him, but he was the one that owned all that property, and he knew what was in that area. That's why it's not a housing development right now. And if you keep going down to the south, you see you're back into the I-2 area. I would not really want to live across the street from a junkyard, sitting in my back swimming pool, but that's, nor here nor there. That could be the future of...
Or across the creek.
Yes, and I've seen it flood to where they was about ready to start sandbagging that channel, that creek, to keep water from coming into Salina. And that was the last flood that we had not too long ago. And it was washing out the railroad tracks also that are just running along through there. So, building a housing development in there would take a little consideration too. But for an open storage area, we're not expecting any water. We're not expecting a road to come in there, have anybody paying of a road or anything like that. Because that's what we're not trying to build a home in there. And we can't build a home in there the way it is now, even though it's listed as residential. That's very confusing. So I don't know if there's much more I can say on that, but just by the surrounding areas, there's really not much of a home site development there. It'd be more beneficial for a resident or for a utility storage yard or some type of small industry. So I agree with your last decision 100%, but there's things that we've got to do and, make everybody happy.
Would C5 instead of I2 get you same thing you're looking for?
Basically, yes. Okay. Yeah, because we would be able to store, equipment and everything.
The difference is that C5 has a mandatory paving requirement as opposed to I2 where it would be optional. So in other words, if you have paved outdoor, if you have C5 zoning, your outdoor storage area would need to be a paved area as opposed to a gravel or asphalt millings.
And are there mandatory landscaping or screening requirements with the C5?
There would be screening if there was actually residential housing in the vicinity. But
there's not.
There's a lot of natural vegetation out there which provides screening, but that would be the primary distinction.
Any questions for Mr. Gafford? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public that would like to address this issue? If not, I'll bring it back to the commission for further comment. Gentlemen, other things you'd like to say?
Dean, is this parcel a candidate for Plan Development District?
It could be, but what I was suggesting earlier to Mr. Perney was that when somebody applies to go from RS to I2, you can give them or recommend a change that is more restrictive. And again, I want to focus on 2A on what your communication is about the comprehensive plan, and I can get into 2B that more specifically. But a planned C5 district could be recommended, and a planned district can have one single allowed use. And so you can do a planned C5 district where the only permitted use is a contractor's outdoor storage.
But it still has to be paved.
It still have to be paid. He's already indicated to us that he wanted to asphalt it. He would
I didn't know that.
He would have to clarify that, but that is the primary distinction. It's not that staff is in love with I2. We've already had that discussion endlessly about the differences between I2 and C5. It's just the fact that you had the existing I-2 parcel next door to it. And so being next door to an I-2 parcel and I-2 allowing the use that was requested, that seemed as a possibility, but it is certainly an option to do something more restrictive than I-2. It makes no sense to do something that was a C1 or a C2 or something like that, because that doesn't allow the use that the applicant is requesting. So again, on item 2A, you may resubmit the same recommendation that you did, was to basically show this area here as purple future employment instead of the urban residential, or you can say that you could see leaving it as urban residential, not changing the plan, and trying to find a way to accommodate the applicant's use within the current plan.
Well, since everybody else has entered their opinion, the chair would like to enter his, and I still concur with the original findings we have. I don't see that this property or the additional Gardner area is related to the Broadway area. I think the original comprehensive plan, it's been recognized, has some errors in it, and this may be one aberration. I've never been along any commercial street like State or Broadway or 9th or South 9th where it's not all commercial. The residential, urban residential doesn't fit it. There's commercial all the way along the south, the west side of Broadway. You've got a natural boundary there in the creek, and if anything's going to happen with that in the future, I think that it's going to be of a employment or an industrial nature. That, and the city has sort of, at least in some of our comments about gateways to Salina, the conversation has leaned away from taking State Street off of that gateway list, and the city's own comprehensive plan is trying to steer residential development in different directions than this avenue into the city. So it makes no sense to me, and I still stand by their original findings. And the City Commission also made note that the requested map amendment, let's see, the requested map amendment would not upgrade and could negatively impact future development. I don't believe that, because there could be improved property values there and tax revenues generated. And there is a public need to be met by amending the plan, because I think it would encourage other investors to see clearly what that area can be developed as, and they may step forward once it's not urban residential. So, other further comments? Is there a motion on this item?
I'm going to make a motion, and then I'll have an opportunity to hopefully explain why I'm doing it here in just a second. I move that we change our previous recommendation and move to deny application M13-6.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there further discussion?
I have some. I'm very certain at whatever level that the comprehensive map is not correct in this area. And I will vote. I'm sorry, I'm going to finish. I mean, it's correct as it's drawn. I don't mean that there's an error in where the lines are put right now, but I don't think it's correct into its long-term vision. I don't believe that fixing it one little chunk at a time is the right way to do it. So my hope in voting to change our application is that someone, maybe this group, bring back something that says, let's look really hard at this entire area and let's change this from, urban residential to an I-2 or some sort of employment area. So I'm much in favor of keeping what I decided. I just don't want to do it one little piece at a time.
Other comments or discussion?
We had a second on that motion.
I think
Yes, I did.
Mr.
Second.
Perning.
So that there's discussion.
And I certainly concur. I mean, yes, I concur with what Jerry said. That's exactly my thought. A piece at a time is not wise, but the whole area needs to be revisited.
All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Nay.
Four in favor, 2 against.
Next item on the agenda is the zoning.
I'm sorry, that didn't add up. 4 and 2 is only 6.
What did you
With the 4.
5 and
5-2.
5 and 2.
Thank you.
Thank you. Number 2B, where does that put us with that, staff?
Well, what you're saying is that you don't support amending the comprehensive plan on a limited basis as described in the application. What we have pointed out is that there, and I'll just start on page 3 of the staff report. One of the factors that under Kansas law, both statutory and Kansas Supreme Court, you are to look at is the suitability of property for development under the requested I-2 zoning and the extent to which the current zoning inhibits development and use of the property. And basically the applicant is taking the position that the current RS zoning, because you can't build a house on it, inhibits his ability to make any productive use of the property, and changing the zoning would provide more options. One of the things that the City Commission concluded was that it's not necessarily the zoning itself, but the lack of utilities, which makes this unsuitable for development. It's not that per se. We're going to have Mr. Story you're not going to be able to come back yet.
I can't talk on this either.
No, you can't talk on this one.
Sorry.
And the other thing is whether the requested I-2 zoning would be compatible with the zoning and uses of nearby property, whether the proposed I-2 zoning would overtax public utilities, overload, or negatively impact streets, things of that nature. We pointed out the limitations and the existing conditions associated with Cherry Street. And then in terms of the comprehensive plan, whether the proposed rezoning would be contrary to goals, objectives, and policies of the plan, whether the proposed rezoning would require an amendment to the plan, whether amendment could be justified. So, on the one hand, if you look at the existing character of the surrounding area, having a contractor storage yard would probably be compatible with the zoning uses of nearby property. We focused on the existing I-2 lot, but the same could be said for the existing C5 zoning on Broadway. However, if you approve the request for I-2 zoning, you would just be reinforcing the existing conditions and patterns, and it would not be consistent with what is set out in the comprehensive plan. So some of the findings that you made was that this meets the minimum dimension requirements for an I-2 development lot and has public street access. It also meets the minimum dimensions for a C5 development lot and has public street access. It is adjacent to C5 zoning, not on the north, but it is adjacent on the east. It is not redevelopable for residential purposes without some public infrastructure improvements. You found that it was physically separate and not related to the Broadway redevelopment corridor. In order to justify using a C5 or a planned C5, you would have to determine that it was actually physically related in some way to the C5 zone property to the east. And then the other finding that was made is that it doesn't appear that you've completely given up on the idea that a future land use map amendment could be justified, but you find the area under consideration too small. What the City Commission found was that the property was unsuitable for development, not because of the zoning, but because of the lack of utilities. They were concerned that this I-2 spot zoning not serve as a basis or justification for additional requests, and they thought that the I-2 zoning conflicts with the comprehensive plan, and amendment of the plan is not justified. As I explained, you could resubmit the same recommendation to rezone this property to I-2, but your previous action, you didn't support making a comprehensive plan change at this time, or you could change your original recommendation based on new or modified findings. As I said, the most restrictive alternative to the I-2 zoning would be a planned C5 with a single use, which would be a contractor storage yard as the only permissible non-residential use, and with a requirement that the fenced-in storage area be paved with asphalt or concrete and screened if required. I don't see anything right now that we would be needing to screen from. Mr. Dethridge would need to clarify what his plan is, what portion of the property he sees fencing in and paving in terms of the whole piece, and then that would be a potential option or modification. The size of the parcel is 16,400 square feet. It's not clear what portion of the property Mr. Dethridge is planning to actually utilize. And we may be, I'm going to have to go back and second guess that number. I think our total land area is larger than that when we include the Worcester piece. So that may be transposed, maybe 61,400 square feet, but we will confirm that. But anyway, Mr. Dethridge's piece of this is 26,000 square feet, and it's not clear to us. And John, do you have the certificate of survey in the collection of drawings? And you could zoom that out. So this is the parcel that belongs to Mr. Dethridge. It's got 26,000 square feet. And he would need to indicate to you what portion of this he would actually plan to fence in and surface for storage. But the most restrictive option that you could recommend would be a Plan C5 with that as the only permitted non-residential use. And the basis for doing that without a companion amendment of the plan would be Mr. Perney's comments that the convenience, retail, and service is not defined, and the potential uses in a mixed-use district are not defined at this time. So with that limited use restriction, that it could be potentially compatible with the urban residential designation. So with that, I'd be open to any questions, and then I think we would ask Mr. Dethridge to give an indication of what portion of this area he would actually plan to utilize in his own. And then the option related to that would be to focus solely on his tract and to leave the Worcester tract out of it in terms of just focusing on this and Mr. Deathridge's plans for the property.
It seemed like to me it's going to be really difficult for us to approve this if we didn't approve the other one. And again, I don't want Mr. Deathridge to think that I'm not hoping that we can find a way to make this property more usable for yourself and also as a potential income generator for the city of Salina. I don't think that's our job to make the application here for you, but as I'm listening to things, it sounds like there's some options that the applicant could go back and refile in the way of some other zonings that might in fact allow him to do what he wants to do there, but I don't think that's our job to do that here.
Well,
that would be I'm just taking an opinion here.
And I would agree with you.
Well, I'm thinking that the Wooster Track, if it had been brought into town at its use, it was a C5 use. The last commercial use of the Wooster Track was a C5 use. It was automobile repair, which is allowed in C5. If we went with the C5, it is adjacent and nearly adjacent to the other C5 on Broadway, so it is compatible with the potential redevelopment of Broadway. And if these properties were ever acquired by somebody that was acquiring 3 or 4 properties on Broadway, it would be easier for that person to just have one zoning classification to start out with for whatever reuse they might come up with. So I'm still of the opinion that we shouldn't make this go on forever. A landscape business does, I assume your landscape business does do both residential and commercial landscaping. So in the big picture, it is a business that is under that land use category of supporting urban residential properties. So since this is we have met the enemy and he is us kind of problem. We've written these rules trying to guess what the future is going to be, and we've written definitions that conflict with what people in the real world that have a business that have an idea, that have a use for the land, want to do. But it's just our rules that are all so convoluted. I think we all know that going ahead and using that particular property for whatever period of time it's going to take as a landscape construction storage yard is a reasonable use looking at what's there now. It's also a reasonable use that can easily be converted to something else because you're not really going to do anything to the property except pave part of it and store things there and hopefully eventually make some money out of your efforts. So that's why I would really like to make this work as a C5. It's compatible with the Broadway, and we don't have to change the comprehensive plan to do that.
Mr. Gafford, would the applicant like to address us?
One more on Deathridge.
Would you pave it?
Sorry.
Okay, yeah, C5, if that would, work for that corridor right in through there along Cherry Street, because I don't know what the salvage yard Ronix is going to be. Is that still grandfathered in?
Yes.
Okay, so that would basically take care of Cherry Street going towards Broadway. A nice, basically it's all still resident or commercial area. And it all kind of blends in. So, we won't be able to pour concrete right away. But, we will do, and then the area that we plan on, we'll probably plan on doing the whole yard, as much of that yard as we can with the blacktop area, and then if we do put a fence in, it'll be going along Cherry Street.
For the benefit of the Planning Commission staff and those here, here is the property, this is the Cherry Street side, this is the creek side. Where on this property and to what extent do you see fencing and surfacing?
The fencing will be right along Cherry Street, because there's a fence right there at Ronix, and then there's a existing fence and tree line, which would be on the north side of the property. So, and then you have the creek area that divides the west side, or no, the east side of the property. There's a creek that drops off on the east side of the property. So if we was to fence anything in, it would be on the west side, facing Cherry Creek, or facing Cherry.
Or would it be completely enclosed by fencing?
Depending on, no, because the creek, there's no fence on the creek.
Okay. And so this is roughly 135 feet across here. Are you saying that you're going to surface this entire area, or what? Taking this pointer to show everyone here where you envision putting surfacing.
I do too.
where you
I agree.
envision putting
I fully agree. We don't want to stay here and
Fence will run
plan this for him.
right along
It's not our
the
job.
property line, because this is Cherry Street right here, and this area here, for the present time, this will be eventually all blacktop,
Okay.
so that we can store equipment.
So it's an area that's 190 feet deep, and it's 137 feet wide, so you would envision surfacing the entire area.
Correct.
$100,000 worth of black, $125,000 worth of
Just
blacktop.
wanted to make sure that we were not looking at a partial area and everybody understood the dimensions that were being discussed.
Dean, how's that property addressed?
It is addressed off of Cherry Street.
Okay. And do we as a city have any responsibility regarding roadways and so forth on C5 properties?
I'm not, what is the,
Well, I drove down that road and it begins to deteriorate significantly as you get down that way. So are we
we
going to
have
require
a-
a fire truck to be able to get down there?
we have a general maintenance responsibility to keep the road passable to traffic.
Okay, thank you.
It is a public, it's a designated as a public street, which we inherited when we annexed the property again in 1971.
And I was just
So
looking so that we didn't have some unintended consequences if we were to
Right.
do what Abner's
What
talking about.
we were looking at before and discussing is the fact that there are no utilities makes it very self-limiting that even if you had commercial industrial zoning, you're not going to be able to put uses that generate large amounts of traffic. However, the purchase of the Ronick storage yard by BFR Metals has increased the traffic and usage on Cherry Street beyond what it was when it was just operated by Mr. Ronick. There is no doubt about that, but it is the obligation of the city to keep that surfaced as a gravel public street.
I wanted to comment that I've been there also, and the existing fencing, to my subjective view, is considerably less than 5 feet, or maybe at 5 feet, waist high or so, and it's not a very good screen. I'd like to suggest an 8-foot screen, or 6 foot to 8 foot screen of some kind.
You know, at times I've sat here and I said, it's awkward for me to sit here as one commissioner and plan someone's project. for
Right,
them.
I agree with that.
I mean, I think that you've applied for I-2. My opinion would be that you would work with the city, with the planning staff who understands all the rules, and if you want to go with a planned C5 or a PDD, come back to us with a drawn-out plan, and us trying to figure out for you how tall the screen should
Right.
be, how much paving you have, how much this and that. It'd be better to have staff work with you than you bring a plan back that we could look at.
I agree.
Because you've got some costs involved that you're going to have to look at. You can't make those decisions without, hard service is rather expensive.
But see, since across the road, we don't have any clue. Do you know when the development will be over there for the housing?
So looking at your
So then, the screening is really not reasonable right now.
Well, that's
be
something I
trying
think
to
you would
put
work
up-
What
with staff
I'm
on.
hearing Mr. Kennedy say, which is correct, that when you do a planned development district or planned district, it implies that there is a plan. And so, if you were to so again, you have the authority to recommend approval of a more restrictive zoning designation in the I-2. You could direct that the application be amended from I-2 to Plan C5, that it focus on the 140 Cherry Street address only, and that staff work with Mr. Deathridge to work up a plan based off of this that would show you the area that would be utilized, the plan for fencing or screening, and the driveway location on Cherry, and bring that back to you. We could certainly do that. That would keep it in your jurisdiction till we had an opportunity which we could bring that back October the 1st at your next meeting.
Basically, we just need to deny the 2B in order to...
You would not deny it, because then you would force him to... He doesn't need to start over. What you did with...
Going to C5.
What you did with Foxborough mini storage is you said you would not entertain a straight I-2, but you would consider a PDD I-2, so they modified their application and they brought you back their actual plan. If you said you're not supportive of I-2, you would consider a Plan C5 subject to Mr. Deathridge bringing you a plan for how 140 South Cherry Street would be utilized. We would work with him to take this and work it up into a plan that you could then consider and evaluate the merits of the plan.
My actual inclination is to just approve it as an unrestricted C5, and then anything that would occur would require a building permit and water and sewer utilities. So again, it would really just be in a holding pattern until there is a redevelopment area effort on the property. And in the meantime,
if this property were
we could
zoned,
proceed with the...
if it were zoned C5, he could have a landscape contractor's storage
Right.
yard on it, but without the benefit of anybody seeing what the plan actually is.
Correct. And it wouldn't be, in my opinion, it wouldn't be any worse than the other C5 that faces Broadway that's been there for 40, 50, 60 years.
Well, what's there to see? I mean, basically, he's going to add either a fence and pavement, because he can't get a building permit.
Right.
So I'm not sure what we would approve, other than if he already says he's going to pave the whole thing, I don't know, and then put a 6-foot privacy fence
What we're
up.
approving is letting him have a storage yard there at all.
Right. So a less restrictive alternative, or excuse me, a more restrictive alternative than I-2 is straight C5, and even more restrictive alternative is Plan C5 that only allows a single use. And within the Plan C5 option is an option for requesting that he prepare and bring back a plan for the 140 South Cherry property.
Do you need that in a motion, Dean, or is that just a...
Those are just choices. One choice is to recommend C5 zoning in lieu of of the I-2. Another option is to recommend PC5 zoning in lieu of the I-2. Another option would be to recommend PC5 zoning and defer action till he brings you back a plan. Another option would be to change your recommendation and recommend denial of the request altogether.
Mr. Deathridge, which of those appeal to you?
Let's go with the C5 unrestricted. I think that would, because until there is any development, you know, to actually see the property, you have to drive directly down Cherry Street. You're not going to see it when you're coming down State Street. Because if you're driving down State Street and you're looking off, you may run into a vehicle that's turning in to go to the salvage yard. Or you may run into one of the buses that are coming out of the bus barn that is coming in and out of there on a daily basis.
That is true, but we're concerned with the appearance of the area generally. And I think it's a good, point well taken.
Yeah, we're not going to have a bad-looking property.
Yeah. I would move that we have a Plan C5 as described by Dean, if I understand right, without the necessity of coming back, who's working with staff?
I'll run those by one. You could have a straight C5 based on its contiguousness to the property on Broadway. That would allow the full menu of C5 uses, understanding that he can't really utilize many of those because of the lack of utilities. You could recommend a planned C5 that limited him solely to a landscape contractor's storage yard as the only non-residential use. Or you could do a planned C5 that did the same but required him to work with staff to develop an actual plan for the usage of 140 South Cherry and bring it back to you for review. Or you could recommend that the request be denied altogether.
So I would move for the Plan C5, bring it back for review, if that's the option.
The
that's
chair will
available.
hear the motion if Mr. Dethridge would nod his head that he's comfortable with that option. To work, and then your motion is to work with staff, and
Yes.
is there a second to that?
Review. I second that.
Any more discussion?
Do we need to put in that motion something that we're modifying? I mean, do we need anything for the city commission on
We
this?
would be focusing on 140 South Cherry Street only.
Yeah, what does that,
Does the city
what does that
commission
do with the Worcester tract then? It leaves
Mr.
it,
Wooster hasn't really been actively involved in pursuing or assisting with this. Mr. Dethridge has, so we don't have any qualms about dropping that out if your basis is tying it back to Broadway. That's different than trying to tie it to the area to the north, and the C5 is different. But as I understand the motion, it's to direct the applicant to request or to modify the application to a Plan C5 for 140 South Cherry, to work with staff to develop a plan for that property and to bring it back to you for your consideration.
And I seconded that motion earlier.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
aye.
So that is 6-1.
Yes.
Okay, we will work with Mr. Dethridge between now and your next meeting and come back with a better description of that and a description of what that option entails.
Right. What this is going to be. This is already I2.
That will be communicated back to the city
That's going to be
commission.
just planned, and that's all it can be. And then if anything else ever is sold, it can't be that. Storage right back in. I like that.
How many square feet?
Plus, it doesn't commit this whole thing is
We'll try to schedule a meeting with you to develop
My brother was
Oh, I think she's pointing. Thank you very much for your patience.
couldn't find it because this was
Moving on down the agenda to the next
Oh,
item.
that's the other.
Here, commercial and industrial back there.
Is there another item?
There is. There's an update. We have an update from staff.
We'll just do a brief update.
once you rezone
I do
this-
have a quick
once you
question. As I
rezone
understand, the county commission did not take any formal action today on your request.
The county commission did not take any formal action today. They wish to confer with the
City
city attorney and the county attorney before they make that appointment.
I want to, this came back to you for two reasons. One is to update the status, and updating the status is for two reasons. John, you have prematurely turned off our graphics, and we need to get those back alive. Wanted to point out that you reviewed this preliminary plat, and we had a report, you had conditions, we identified some specific what I would call technical corrections. Then subsequent to that, we found, if you could go to the plat, John, the preliminary plat. So I want to point out two, what I would consider revisions that we needed to bring back to your attention. Item one was we did not determine till after the meeting that there was a flood control easement or a flood easement that the Saline County had purchased from the previous owner that runs across this corner. That status as a flood easement basically makes that area an unbuildable drainage area. So subsequent to the meeting, we met with the applicants and said you essentially have two options. One is to redesign this northeast corner, bring the street in something like this and show this as an unbuildable drainage area, or you may pursue with Saline County getting that easement released. That area is still a floodplain area and it would still be subject to a plan for needing a floodplain fill permit and a elevation of the area to make it where this could be any sort of buildable area. The other thing was that we have a requirement in our subdivision regulations that if you have opposing streets that meet on opposite sides of an arterial street, they either need to match up or be offset by at least 150 feet. We did not have the exact location pinned down correctly for Brayburn Street, so this jog right here has been put into Harbor Drive, and so that now matches up with Brayburn Street, which is in Liberty Edition number 2 across the street. And then the result of that is a slight reconfiguration here of the commercial lot and the loss of one residential lot there. And as I understand it, Craig and Stan can correct me, on this version there was one lot over here that was eliminated, and so this preliminary plat has 2 fewer lots on it. It has 1 commercial and 79 residential instead of 1 commercial and 81. So we wanted to bring that back so that you could see this. This would, if this easement is released, this preliminary plat could serve as a future preliminary plat in the future. John, if you could zoom in on this area up here, please. The other thing that has been done on this revised drawing is there was kind of a request to more clearly depict where the access point would be for this commercial lot. This is the proposed access opening. It is 200 feet south of Schilling Road. It's 192 feet north of Harbor Drive. It's a single location there, and so that has been identified. We have it's just an ongoing thing working with the applicant surveyor. The 2 other items we noted is instead of referring to this as parcel B, this is part of the subdivision, so this would be lot 1, block 1 of the Ryan addition, not parcel B. And then we're still working with the surveyor. The actual boundary of this subdivision is the center of Ohio, and there would be a 50-foot dedication of right-of-way. Our update on the current status was that your jurisdiction to consider the plat in July was based on the filing of an application for annexation and the assumption that when this property was platted, it would be a part of the city of Salina because it was accompanied by a request. At their most recent meeting, the City Commission voted not to annex this parcel into the city. The effect of that is that it nullified any action you took on the plat, which was based, your jurisdiction was based on it being brought into or part of the city. So in terms of the current status is that without the annexation of this parcel, none of those recommendations or action had any legal status, and so what the applicants would be doing is at some point in the future needing to reapply and start from scratch, except they could essentially resubmit this same thing, the same three requests, this plat, an annexation request, and the zoning. I'm not going to go into great detail. We talked to you about the utility and extension agreement. What we pointed out was the trigger for that agreement was the city obtaining actual marketable title to Oakdale Park. That has not occurred yet. Because it has not occurred yet, the actions in the utility extension agreement are not mandatory on the city, and so staff would not foresee anything happening on this property until and unless the city were to obtain title to Oakdale Park through the county, at which time that would enable these applicants to reinitiate their applications. This is hard to see, but this is the new revised flood map for the area. This is the Schilling Road ditch. This is a large detention storage area. That detention storage area just nicks the northeast corner of this property, and that is why that is subject to a flood easement. The easement can be released, the floodplain is going to remain, and then if it's floodplain and not easement, we can still work with the applicant to get it removed from the floodplain, but until such time as the easement might get released, that this is not a buildable, developable area. And so our update on the status is to tell you that this is essentially going to be in a start-over mode at some point, and we also wanted to we did not know at the time that we saw this before that we had this easement in flood status in this corner, and we had this slight jog here to make that match up. So according to Mr. Byquist, the county did not take any formal action this morning on their easement release. They're going to be consulting and coordinating with the city on that, but we wanted to, because you had acted on this and because you as a planning commission approve or disapprove plats, we just wanted to bring this back to tell you what the status was of your approval of the plat. That approval was contingent on the property actually being in the city limits, and at this time it has not been approved for annexation.
City commissioners denied the request by what vote?
I do not have that in front of me. I believe it was 3-1.
4-1, I think. 3-1 or 4-1.
She wasn't there.
It's 3-1. Stand with it.
Actually,
said the paper,
the
3-1.
actual declining of the annexation was 4-0.
Yeah.
And then because you had two recommendations, one regarding annexation, one regarding the zoning of the property. Because the property was not going to be annexed, there was no reason for them to consider the zoning because it wasn't part of the city.
And our vote on the request was what? When we originally heard it?
So to move this along, we can't take any action on this anyway, so it's just information, right?
This is information for you since you saw it and it passed out of this commission, but it is all contingent on this being incorporated into the city limits of the city. At this time, the city commission declined to approve the annexation of this parcel, so the action that you took in terms of recommendations doesn't have any status because it's not part of the city limits, and you only have authority on property that is either part of or requested to become part of the city limits. So we had thought that we might be able to update you on what the county had decided about this easement, but essentially if the applicants want to share with you that they don't plan to give up, that they plan to resubmit at some point. I guess they could share that with us. But basically, if this is resubmitted, it will be resubmitted as 3 brand new applications, 1 to annex, 1 to rezone, and 1 for a preliminary plat, with this pretty much not needing much more work to come back.
Would the applicant like to give anything for the record?
Stan Vikvis, 2601 South Ohio. Thanks for taking the time to hear me again. A little surprised I'm here. Obviously, I don't totally concur with the City Commission, but I think I understand their legal point at this time. It's my opinion that until the county transfers the land, that the utility extension is not in effect. Once the county does transfer the land, then it's my opinion that the city is obligated to run utilities, and by our contractual agreement, it's also my opinion that the city is obligated to let us hook up to utilities, and since only way you can hook up to utilities is to be platted and zoned, I think at that point in time the City Commission will reverse their decision. This is my opinion, but I have had some legal counsel. So it is our intent, once the county gets the land transferred, and they have been dragging their feet for 2 years, we fully expect to be back here with that plat, other than there could be a modification possibly in the corner up there. We're in the process, we have petitioned actually the county to take that drainage easement and do away with it. That's what they're conferring with legal counsel on right now, is whether they can do that, because it's an agreement, I believe, with the county and the city. The city's involved too on that drainage easement.
It's a jointly constructed
It's a jointly constructed easement, so they're conferring with the city now. But we've come quite a ways in that process, but the decision by the 3 commissioners has not been made yet. So that's going to transpire in the next month or 2, I hope. So by the time we come back, that'll either be resolved one way or another. We'll reconstruct that corner in a different manner, or it will be very similar to what you have now. I know there's been a lot of talk, and this is for your information, and I will gladly get this typed up in a typewritten form and give it to any of you that would request. But I understand the city's commission, their new terminology is smart growth, and I understand it. Is it for Salina, Kansas? I question that. But I want to throw out a few facts that don't seem to be well known. I mean, I know them because I'm the one that's paid the bill. So I just want to inform you a little bit, and I'd be glad to provide you a typewritten copy of this. Eastview Estates was my first subdivision. It's 134 plus lots. Approximate value on each building is in excess of $175,000. It was started in 1999, finished in 2005. Presently, there are in excess of 23 million homes there. A lot of jobs, a lot of property taxes paid. Matter of fact, $348,000 a year paid in property taxes by the homeowners of Eastview Estates. Since inception, $3,481,000 have gone to the city and the county by that subdivision. Eastview and the reserves at Prairie Glen have paid $60,000 directly out of their pocket to the city, and that was for drainage. And the city paid $151,000 to the Miller family for the drainage for the drainage easement into the what's called the Knox sand pit from the Miller family. Eastview paid the city back $60,000 or $151. In addition, Eastview has paid $27,000 in park fees. Eastview held the lot off the market on Ambassador Street for 5 years to provide sewer access for the property now known as the reserves at Prairie Glen. This brought 96 subsidized apartments and a Brown Mackey campus, which are now occupied and are educating. Had we not held that lot off the market and provide sewer access, it wouldn't be there. There was no sewer access. There wasn't a solution without Eastview doing that. The reserves pay $44,000 a year in property taxes. Since inception, $270,000. In addition to hundreds of thousands of dollars in building permits, building fees, in addition to sales taxes on materials, in all the jobs that were created. In addition, Brown Mackey pays $31,000 a year in property taxes. Since inception, $121,000. And then Eastview gave the city the additional land on Magnolia so they could widen Magnolia. So there's one subdivision right there that when the city commissioners say that to expand and bring a piece of property into the city, it costs the city money. I think this will show you it costs the developer money, it costs the taxpayers money, and there are a lot of benefits the city receives when they do bring one in. And Eastview in 1999 is exactly a carbon copy of the Ryan plat. It's set on the empty corner, on the southeast corner of, at that point in time, Magnolia and Ohio. It was the empty corner. It's an exact carbon copy of what this is. Real quick, Quail Meadow Estates, it was developed. There are $21 million worth of homes in there, pays $317,000 a year in property taxes. Currently, $23 million worth of homes in Quail Meadow Estates. $1,470,000 paid since inception in property taxes. Quail Meadow Estates is in the process, and we've paid and I don't have an exact figure right now because we just paid some more. Just paid another $29,000, I think it was. We have paid or are obligated to pay $160,000 out of our own pocket to pay for Schilling Road and pay for the water line on Schilling and pay for the drainage into the Schilling ditch. Now that's $160,000 directly out of our pocket that is not paid by any taxpayer. So what I'm saying there is there's benefits to the city, and I can go on. We ran an 8-inch water line from Schilling back to Bonnie Ridge to supply them with water, $8,000 out of our own pocket. But I've taken enough of your time. I'll address any questions, but I think we will see you back here in 6 months, and hopefully we can go forward and the county will have the land transfer done, and we hopefully can go on and be beneficial to the city of Salina.
Thank you, Mr. Byquist. We appreciate your efforts to provide
anybody
valuable...
would like a copy of this, I'd be glad to get it typed up and provide it to you.
Yeah, we'll let you know.
Thank you.
Any other comments on that item? We have an annual business meeting to conduct.
Now for the important part. We have positions where Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Story have been appointed to new terms. We do not yet have a replacement for Mr. Mike Sell, nor do we have youth member appointments made yet. By our count, Mr. Ryan has served 2 full terms as chairman, is not eligible to serve another term without sitting out a year. Everyone on the commission except Mr. Ryan and Mr. Story are eligible to be nominated for the position of chairman. Mr. Welsh served a term as vice chairman, is eligible for another term. Everyone except Mr. Story, and including Mr. Ryan, would be eligible for the position of vice chairman. So our first order of business would be to nominate and elect a chairman for the 2013-2014 Planning Commission term.
Are there nominations for chairman?
Is it traditional for the vice chairman to move up, and if so, Mr. Welsh, are you willing to accept the position?
Not necessarily, and yes. Are those in the right order?
Okay. Well, I'd move that Mr. Welsh be
I'll second it.
nominated as chairman.
Are there any other nominations for the position of chairman?
If not, is there a motion to accept the nomination by acclamation?
Yeah, I move we accept the nomination by acclamation.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I'd like to
Congratulations, Mr. Chairman.
make a motion that Mr. Jerry Boxa be elected as vice chairman.
Second that.
Are there any other nominations? Is there a motion to accept the nomination?
So moved by acclamation.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We have a chairman and a vice chairman. Congratulations, gentlemen. And maybe I'm officially out of the spot, but I'd like to thank the staff for the last couple of years' worth of support that they've given me, and wish Dean a happy birthday today as well.
We have a opportunity for Mr. Ryan to continue to serve as your appointed representative to the BZA, or if you would like to look for alternatives to that, we have 2 positions. One is a Planning Commission liaison to BZA, one is Planning Commission liaison to Heritage Commission. As we pointed out, Mr. Kennedy is your current liaison to Heritage Commission, and Mr. Ryan's your current liaison to BZA. There are no term limits on that, but they're subject to nomination and reappointment or volunteering each year. And so the BZA meets the 3rd Thursday of each month. They actually meet 2 days from now. So we need to have someone appointed from the commission to represent the commission on the BZA.
If they are willing, I would move that we reappoint both members.
I'd like to. I like serving on the Heritage Commission, so I appreciate that. If that's
And
all
I
right
would
with
just
the
say
commission.
that I'm glad to serve in that capacity, but any of you that would like the experience of serving on the BZA are certainly welcome to take that. It's interesting. But are hands shooting up?
I didn't see one.
I guess I will stay with the BZA.
Absent any volunteers and the willingness of existing volunteers to re-enlist, then our records will show that our new chairman is Mr. Welsh, our new vice chairman is Mr. Baxa, Mr. Ryan is the liaison to the BZA, and Mr. Kennedy will continue as liaison to the Heritage Commission.
For me.
I wanted to
matters?
formally extend my thanks to Carl Ryan for his able handling of the administrative positions of the board. He's done.
I just let you guys roll
fine.
with it, don't I?
There'll be punch and cake out in the hallway.
Yeah. I would comment to the succeeding chairman that if you can keep the opinion down and stay on track with the agenda, you shorten your meetings up, as Mr. Kennedy has often pointed out.
But hasn't often followed. Nor likely
I'll second
won't.
that.
That's right. I was going to say that.
So we will meet on the 1st. We will work with Mr. Deathridge to bring something back. We have a text amendment that we were advertising the public hearing to discuss the modified paving standards. We will also bring back to you, we showed you our staff-produced parcel-based future land use map that we feel has better defined boundaries and edges that we would recommend be adopted as a substitute for what we refer to as the fuzzy plan that is in the actual document. So we'll have that for your consideration and recommendation. We are also, as part of that, the first October meeting, we will, and we're not going to have a large number of them, but we will have a landscape award ceremony. Right now, our primary nominee for what we call the Golden Leaf Award is the Children's Center located at Oakdale and Ash that has been nominated by the Tree Advisory Board. If you've got any other notable projects that you want to bring to our attention, please do. But I think the project that we're presently planning to recognize for their outstanding landscaping would be the Children's Center there at the corner of Oakdale and Ash, and how that's changed that corner there. And so the city forester carves out a special golden leaf for those recipients. That is our plan for now. And then on the 15th, we'll be bringing back the full applications for Kansas Wesleyan related to their sports complex and piece those all together. And what we plan to do is do a detailed analysis for the commission, where we will basically start at Claflin, go down to Cloud, and describe for you the parking, what is there, and the parking situation on all of those residential units on the east side of Osborne, so you have a good feel for that. The difference is that we've got some setback issues and some things on actual buildings and structures on the campus, and we felt those should best be addressed through a PDD, so that will be coming to you. So you'll be looking at the setbacks and the arrangements of all the physical structures on the sports complex campus, along with what's happening in the 4 surrounding streets. But that'll come to you on the 15th. And my other matter is that on the 23rd, what we determined, and part of that would lie with staff, but we determined that back in 2008, the intent of the first reading ordinance and the recommendations from the Board of Advisors and the Planning Commission was that dog kennels and small animal hospitals be included all along, and that they were excluded not by specific motion or intent, but by omission. So the text amendment that you considered made a recommendation on to add dog kennels as a conditional use. We informed the City Commission that should not have had to have been filed at all, because it was inadvertently omitted in 2008, not intentionally. And so they're going to consider a action to reinstate the dog kennels and small animal hospitals to C4 as conditional uses, which would then give applicants standing to apply for a conditional use permit for boarding kennels in the C4 district. So as it stands right now, that is a corrective action for them and would require no further hearings or action by you, but it may result in an application for a conditional use permit actually being filed.
They're back.
All right, nobody can say we're not going to the dogs.
We're not going to